We are back.
Okay. All right.
Standards review update, please.
Absolutely. So first couple of these slides are genuinely just for review. You've seen them before, but I always want to be cognizant of our audience may have not been here in the past. So this is just reminding everybody that through 1427, the State Board of Education was tasked with adopting college and career ready standards, with the basis of that comprehensive evaluation being the Common Core standards to start. And then our goal is by July 1st to adopt college and career readiness educational standards. So I'm only going to talk about where we've been since we've last been together. It feels like a lot has been happening every single time between meetings with the standards evaluation process. But since we were last before you, the evaluation panel came back together on March 12th and 13th. In that time they came together, they were essentially working on what we would consider about a draft 2.5, if you will, meaning everything has been continued to evolve as we receive feedback. So on the 12th and the 13th, they continued to use the 2066 online comments that came back in from the field on the standards. They also were using the public hearing feedback, and they were using just their own work around articulation and integration that I described before. The idea of the level of knowledge, the level of practice standards versus mastery standards at every grade level. They continued to look for gaps. So that's what they did on those 2 days with each other. And that was, again, the evaluation teams, evaluation panels. I think overall you've heard many times us talk about the 2066, but correct me if I'm wrong if you've seen this slide or not seen this slide. This is the breakdown of the type of comments that were received. So I thought this might be helpful for you to see just overall what kind of specific feedback. And remember, that was most important to both the evaluation and the college and career ready panel, was the specific comments. So you can see in K-5 ELA, there were 783 comments. I can tell you about 400 of those were specific to cursive handwriting in that. That's why that number is elevated over the others. Then in math, there were 483. 612 ELA 94, 6-8 math 99, 912 math 91, and general overall comments. I just want to give you an example of what that means so you understand why they came out in this general category. These were everything from we love it, we don't like it, there were too many snow days this year, what are you doing about food lunches? I mean, it was just people who wanted to talk to us at the Department of Education. So they were just very general comments. Also, since we've last been together, we've mentioned to you in the past that many different outside experts outside of Indiana were invited to inform the process and look at our drafts. So since we've last been together, all of the persons listed have given feedback that are informing our process. The feedback we've received has been used by the College and Career Ready panel when they've been together both a week and a half ago and then coming together again this Friday. And you can see listed the institutions for where they represent, as well as the standards they provided feedback on, and whether they did it pre-articulation or post-articulation. Most people listed here said, wait, we'd like to wait till the drafts have been further narrowed down, with the exception of Kathleen Porter-McGee. She did do a pre-articulation for ELA and math. And then there's a star next to Dr. Stotsky's evaluation, because I don't want to misstate this, but she was somewhat back and forth on whether she was going to do a formal analysis. And then we recently learned, and she submitted something to the governor, where she hosted a session at IU Bloomington with a group of literacy teachers, and she offered up the draft for them to provide feedback. So she sent some feedback to us, but I don't know that I would call it an evaluation that was hers as much as it was those group of teachers that came together. Anything, Molly, to add to that on this slide that I may have not captured? And I guess I want to say on this before we move on, and Molly can talk too, is this idea of when this feedback has come in and it's gone to the College and Career Ready panel and the evaluation team for them to include in their work, there has been some great feedback for which we've incorporated. And then there's been some feedback for which we said, you know what? Indiana teachers, we talked about this. This was not something that we felt. So some things were, if you will, taken into consideration, but then not included in the draft changes. And some examples of that.
I can give some specific examples. So some pieces of feedback that have been, and I'll speak to ELA a little bit more, universally recommended actually by every evaluator who looked at ELA was having examples of text that, that teachers could look to. And that's something we've all talked about, and that's something that we will be adding in a reference document that's associated with the standards. We're kind of excited about that. We're actually planning on reaching out to the school districts and getting feedback. So that's been an area that's been highly discussed and really universally recommended. In addition, some recommendations that have been made that have been incorporated by the panels, especially when comments were made by evaluators that this is not clear or this would not be understandable to the general public. A lot of work has been done to try to clear up and make the language clearer. In contrast, there have been some suggestions that were recommended by an evaluator that were discussed by the evaluation teams and the CCR panels, and there was disagreement by the panels. For example, a recommendation was made by one evaluator that the entire strand of print concepts in reading foundational skills should be eliminated because all students, when they come to kindergarten, know their letters and know the concepts of print. The evaluation teams felt very strongly that that is not true, especially in Indiana with kindergarten not being mandatory. They felt that it was very, very important to include that. So the feedback has been really, really valuable. I just wanted to give you a couple of examples.
Thank you for that. Those are good ones. So as you can imagine, those are quite hefty in ideas, and I can tell you that we have done a great deal of, I guess, delving into them, not just at our own level, but within, like I said, the evaluation of the College Career team. We have also re-engaged with Suji Shin, who you met back earlier in this process. She is accepting for all of us all these outside evaluations, and she's going to come before you and before the roundtable with a synthesis of all of those. And furthermore, talk about, okay, within all of these, this was a theme. This is how Indiana handled that theme. So therefore, this is across the board, was in all of these analyses, or analysi, I suppose. This is how, what is it? Right, yeah. Anyway, this is how Indiana's team and process has handled these situations. So that will should certainly help this process and help you as well.
Oh, yes, sorry. Go ahead, Andrea.
Well, I have some concern about relying on Susie Shin to synthesize the evaluations of the 5 experts that the state contracted with in terms of just her perspective. I mean, we know that she's affiliated with an organization that's been very involved in Common Core implementation. I would much prefer to have the 5 contracted experts come themselves and synthesize their own evaluation rather than count on some third party to do that for them.
You can go ahead and respond on how that process is going to work with Suji Shin.
Well, I guess it just kind of goes back to what we just said. We feel very strongly about our Indiana process, and while we welcomed their feedback, it was still up to the Indiana team and the Indiana process and the Indiana Education Roundtable and you all to allow for this process to take into consideration their feedback. Because it's feedback. And so just like the example Molly gave, some of it made a lot of sense for Indiana and Indiana educators. Other parts of their feedback did not, in our opinion, as an Indiana
And so what
educator.
exactly is Suji Shin going to do?
She's just going to kind of, again, put together a way, what were the themes found across all of them in mathematics?
Okay.
What was found in all of them in English language arts. She's not giving comment on pro or con,
Okay.
but rather just helping us kind of put together. So again, just
And what we decided to do with it.
And what we decided to do with it. How we, how we integrated those thoughts. Superintendent.
Sorry.
And I also wanted to mention too, Andrea, the actual reports by each of those persons will be provided at a certain time as well, after, with this too.
Actually, that leads me to suggest that the sooner we get those reports released to the public, the better, so that people can read them for themselves and not rely on the synthesis of an outside expert. So I'd like to suggest that we should get those reports out there today to as many people as possible.
We actually were waiting until after the College and Career Ready panel came together Friday, so they could come out at the same time as the final draft. So you could see how the work was included or not included.
And I'll just make a comment regarding Indiana's standards. Indiana is responsible for our standards, and we have engaged experts, and we have engaged experts in all kinds of processes that we do here in the state of Indiana. But at the end of the day, they're our standards. It's what we decide that we're going to do. We've got a pretty extensive evaluation portion going on, and whereby we're going to pay attention to what experts might say. At the end of the day, it's Indiana. It's going to have their own standards. And so I don't want to have anybody go away with the feeling that Indiana needs to accept particular experts' opinions in any way, shape, or form. They are made for feedback, their input to us, just like the 2,000-some comments that we got from stakeholders, just like the hearings that we did, just like the, all the other aspects that we've had in place on our panels and our evaluation teams. I just want to reiterate, Indiana is going to have its own college and career ready assessments, and things may inform us, and we need to be knowledgeable of them, and we may take action on them, but at the end of the day, it's us that will make those decisions.
I think that's an excellent point, Superintendent. I like how you put those all in the same category. All those bodies of evidence, the 2,066 voices, the 100 at the hearings, the 5 experts have all continued to, integrate into our process in an equal way. So I think that's really important.
Oh, Gordon?
I'd like to comment on the process and really, start by echoing Dr. Oliver's comments that started off our meeting. And I know we're not concluded with the process, but I just want to say and go on record for, praising the way this process has gone under very difficult circumstances. We've gone through this process, which I think has been helpful because it's brought a number of different viewpoints to the table. I believe we're about to come up with a set of standards that will ensure Hoosier students are ready for success in the real world. That said, it's been unfortunate from my perspective that this whole discussion has been guided not by what will prepare our students for success, but what words we use to describe those standards. We can debate and have debated what standards are best for our students and how those standards align nationally, but it's disturbing to me as a business person that there are folks who have chimed in during this debate to say that our kids don't need to be taught certain standards, or that it doesn't matter if Indiana is off kilter with the rest of the nation and world. It's been almost a decade since "the world is flat" entered our lexicon as a way to describe the global economy. That was before we had iPhones and before we had Facebook, by the way. And it's only gotten flatter in that time. If I'm hiring someone from Indiana and California, I need to be reasonably assured that that person is competent in certain areas and prepared to work across state lines with a basic set of skills. And if Indiana wants to recruit employers here, they need to know that our students are graduating from high school and going either into the workforce or on to higher education taught to a certain set of standards. Again, I am assured that the standards that we're discussing today and will be before us in coming weeks will keep Indiana competitive. But I did want to offer my 2 cents from a business perspective about this debate. Again, I'm pleased with the process, and I'm confident that we'll end up in the right place with Hoosier standards.
Thank you. Any other comments? Andrea?
So I just want to get back to my point about the 5 national experts. The state contracted with 5 people to evaluate draft number 2. They came back with an enormous amount of suggestions for how to improve draft number 2. Stanford mathematician James Milgram, for example, had comments on virtually every single standard in K-8 in high school. Professor Wu from Berkeley said the high school standards were far from ready for prime time. And the errors they pointed out are not the kind that can be cleaned up overnight. And in fact, the corrections themselves need the same scrutiny that we're giving all of the individual standards from the get-go. And so what I'm suggesting is, rather than wait and see what the experts said was wrong with the standards after it's too late, we need to see the expert evaluations now. So when we get draft 3, we can on our own look and make sure that the errors, particularly in mathematics, so I certainly don't want mathematics errors in our standards, have been cleaned up properly. And so what I'm suggesting is we need to get the expert reports out now. By the time we get them, they will be commenting on a draft that is no longer in play.
But you will, and the goal will be the draft you will see will have taken into consideration what you're determining as errors, because we hope to get out to you by the 16th, which is next Wednesday. The College and Career Ready panel is coming back together this Friday, because they've been working off those experts' feedback. And frankly, they've been working overnight, and they've been working overnight for months now, every time feedback comes in, to continue to use that to guide the draft. So we'd like to give them this Friday to finish their process. This is the College and Career Ready panel. This is the second time, and in some cases, they've met in WebEx format between these last two sessions. Take into consideration all of the feedback that's come in. We just received, I think, the last one as recently as late last week. And then give you the final draft, as well as their reports by next Wednesday, the 16th, in the entirety.
And
then
it's a
you will
very
be able
short
to see-
turnaround, because the roundtable acts on the 21st. Very short turnaround to figure out if the corrections have been made
I
properly.
think it's going to be very evident that the corrections, when appropriate, are made.
Andrea, we're already making them.
Yeah, they're going to be.
We're already doing that. We're in the midst of doing it, and it will be finished on Friday.
Correct.
Yes. Brad?
Well, I haven't seen them.
You'll see them side by side. You'll have seen them being made, have been made.
Just a suggestion, since the last time we'll see before these things wrap up and the final drafts out. One of the takeaways from the public hearing that looking back at it, you always think, how can you improve it? When that final draft comes out, if there's an introduction that kind of captures some of what you already have out on the website in terms of the process and the fact we looked at multiple standards, the fact we're looking for clarity, specificity, if we could have something like that as a preamble to the standards themselves for both language arts and math, I think that'll help, because one of the constant things I think we've been wrestling with is people who just looked at the standards and had to draw their own conclusions because they didn't see all that information, even though we provided it. But I think it has to actually be this time in the actual draft, like right up front, so
Cover
they
sheet.
see that.
Sure, no, it's a great suggestion.
That'll help them.
Yep, thank you. No, I
Okay.
appreciate that.
Okay, I think Tony?
I just want to be clear, is there going to be another point for, say, board members to have any input into any of the standards? I just feel as though this whole process happened somewhere else with someone else, and I'm not sure that, and I know people are opinionated on the board, but I'm not sure that we've ever really had a good airing or discussion about any of the specific standards that are being considered. I think Gordon raised a good point that most of the discussion about this has been about word usage without a lot of discussion about what is it that kids really need to know how to do in the 21st century with a diploma. What are the anchor standards? Sure. What is it that we're going toward? I don't feel as though there's been any discussion at this level about that, really. There's some things that, personally, I believe from a business perspective should be in there. They may not be traditional academic standards, but like collaboration, being able to collaborate and work together, cultural fluency, foreign languages. These are real skill sets that are becoming increasingly important, and I don't know if I've seen them, or if I read it, I don't know that I read it, but is there ever going to be a point where we get to add anything before it's put to a vote?
Sure, it's a great question, and I don't know, Superintendent, if you want to address that, but as I understand our process in Indiana, the roundtable will make a recommendation to you. The opportunity for you to have given comment in a specific standard, I think would have been the same along this process as any person has done so to the educators doing the work. So the drafts have been provided, they've been up for online comment. I think that would have been an opportunity as an individual, because your opinion of, in my opinion, your opinion of as an individual is as strong as mine. And that's how I would give my input. But we have trusted this process to Indiana educators, college and career readiness people, by our decision of who we've appointed to do this work. So
Who's trusted this process to those people? I haven't. Okay, and as far as I know, I'm going to be asked to vote on it.
Sure.
So is
Which
it-
I'll pretty much tell you right now, So I'm just saying, it's something missing here, I think, in general.
I'm sorry that you've, I guess,
with
have
the-
given the draft.
No, I understand what you're saying.
Are we
But,
getting, is there another draft going to the board?
Next week by the 16th.
All right, so on the 16th, you're going to get your third draft. Okay. So, to look at.
Yes, and comments would be great.
Oh, Dan, did you
Thank
have
you.
your hand up?
Just very briefly, we'll get the next draft.
Right.
and
Which we
I'll
hope
be-
is as finals.
yeah, I'll be present at the roundtable as a member, superintendent. I don't know if there's anybody else, but please read, look for, any comments or ideas you have, and it isn't a perfect process. I wish we weren't in this situation, frankly. Almost long for the days of the Common Core, it was quite a journey here, but we're here, we have some deadlines, and I think, obviously, we'll have a last chance to discuss it the day we vote on it, because it's going to be recommended by the roundtable, correct? And I know the process, and it comes here.
I guess I would hope if there's specific feedback that's really important that you think is missing, that we would know it before the roundtable.
Yeah, and-
So we
Me too,
could
yeah.
continue to make those
Yeah.
changes all the
Correct,
way up.
and even the roundtable may make suggestions too, and we'll be
Yeah, that's-
continuing to redo things.
That's true, and that's the 21st, so we're not without any time here. So we'll get a document next week.
Our goal is the 16th,
Yes.
as this College of Community panel will finish this Friday.
Andrea?
Okay, so you're releasing the next draft on what day?
16th is our goal,
To the board members.
The
and the
16th?
roundtable. Mhm.
And the roundtable. When will the public get it?
The public review is finished.
No, when will the public get a copy of the next draft?
After the adoption.
No, I'm saying, when will it be posted for public review?
The public review process is already
No,
done
when it will be posted for the public to look at it?
after it's adopted.
You're saying that we're going to have dramatically rewritten standards from what was presented to the public in February, and they're going to have no opportunity to review it.
Andrea, it's the process
That
that's
is not the
been,
process as I understand it.
it's the process that's been outlined in law. We had our 3 public hearings. We had an online input process. We've had experts give input process. We've had all the input to actually develop the standards. There's not a continuation of coming back to the public at some point. We've already gone through that process.
Well, I need to know what experts in the field of math and experts I trust and people I represent think before I can vote. I can make a determination on my own on the language arts, but I certainly need to consult with mathematicians before I vote on the math standards. And there are many people I think will need to see that draft at the exact same time it's released to the board. And I would like to move that the draft that's made available to the board be simultaneously made available to the public.
Andrea, we're not in an action, we don't have any action on
Second.
this topic today. We don't have an action item on this topic today. It's
I thought we could
it's
make
for
action
discussion.
items on any discussion item that was on the agenda.
Don't believe that's how we're operating in our board operating procedures. And that's why at the beginning of the meeting, we ask for any action items that need to be placed on the agenda.
Well, I tried to put one on, and I was told since it was a discussion item, I'd be fine.
I mean, it just seems to be a basic issue of transparency. I mean, no one's saying we need to have another public hearing, but all she seems to be asking is that people have opportunity to review what we're going to be asked to, vote upon. I'm not even comfortable at this close having not seen it. I don't know what the anchor standards are here. We've been operating under what to me is a total misconception that Indiana is some little educational island that can do its own thing without regard to what's going on in the rest of the world here. And quite frankly, I think we will pay a price if our anchor standards are not aligned with Common Core. Now, that's my personal belief, but at the same time, I feel that whatever it is we're going to be asked to adopt on April 29th should be made available to the public at the earliest convenience. Let's just put it out there and let people see it. I mean, what are we hiding?
Is there a reason why we wouldn't? Because, if they come to us as board members, then they're public records. So, I personally wouldn't have any objection to releasing those. I guarantee you somebody's going to get them if we get them. So I guess just to echo Tony's comments about transparency, I think it would be reasonable to put those up online or release them in some other way.
Did you want to make a comment, Danielle?
Claire was just suggesting that on the website, I guess the CC website, that it has been mentioned that they could be put up for public comment. Or not for public comment, just for
What I want
for
to make,
review.
what I
But
want to
no
make sure
feedback
is
given, right?
clear,
Yeah, because the goal we've been aiming for is to release the next official draft by the middle of next week.
yes.
We've said the 14th, 15th, sounds like 16th. Hopefully it'll be closer to the 15th.
We were actually hoping for the 14th. We were giving ourselves
So
24 hours.
that the roundtable members have a chance to review it before the 21st.
Correct.
And then at the same time, we would release the synthesis and the reports along with the next draft. And then that gives the State Board of Ed members enough time as well to review in advance of the roundtable, as well as the actual board meeting on the 28th.
So Andrea, I'm not, the draft being available isn't the issue for me, okay? It's that we don't have there's not another mechanism for public input. So having them except at the board meeting on the 28th. We've dedicated that board meeting to the adoptions of standards, and then the approval of those standards on that date. So making them available is one thing. Having another whole process for public input is quite another issue.
Well, they can certainly email us during that period. And I might point out that if they're testifying on the 28th, the roundtable will have already acted. And so the 28th is a little late for testimony, but at least they can email us, call us, communicate to us their concerns so that we can make an informed decision.
So we don't need any action in order to just post them on our website. So I just want to clarify, I wanted to be sure that there's not a formal process for more public input.
I understand that. So what I'm suggesting, and this was what I was suggesting when I began my questioning, is that the standards be posted for public access at the same time they're given to the board, and that there not be a day delay, because we can't delay a day. The time frame is so crunched as it is. That was all I was getting at.
Okay, and that's certainly fine. So we will post them when we give them to the roundtable, and we give them to the board.
And our drop-dead deadline for ourselves is the 16th.
Oh, David?
Thanks for doing that. I think transparency is important. I want to get to another major comment that you made about the 28th. I don't intend to accept whatever recommendation comes forward, just carte blanche and vote for it as a consent agenda item.
Oh, no.
It's always,
No.
well, the comment was made if we had comments to make, we should have made them along the way. That's never been the expectation.
Well, it's better if you do, so we can go ahead and make changes.
But the comment was made, we should have been making comments along the way. I felt that I should let the process play out and let those who are involved provide all the comment, then it comes to us. And I was expecting on the 28th that we would have a discussion.
We will.
And there would be opportunities for amendments.
We will.
And so forth and so on. I'm glad the superintendent is saying, yes, we will. Not that I want another long meeting, but it's so critical that we do that. And I would hope at that point that we have a rich discussion around these particular standards. And I'm reassured now the superintendent has said, yes, we will.
And I don't
be
know
able
if
to do
Dr.
that.
Oliver
Yes,
wants to
we
give
will.
comment at this point. So I just think,
Brad?
I just think there was just a misunderstanding, because I think what I was hearing is we're not opening it up for a public comment round, like a formal public comment, but it would naturally go out as a part of the agendas for both the roundtable and the board meeting. And it's a board meeting on the 28th, and I'm assuming the whole meeting, the reason I've carved off that day is to have a big conversation about standards.
I can tell you, given this process, and we've all watched these teams and the hours they've spent, the number of standards that you have to look at, I would hope you would have given a lot of time and thought to them before that. Just because I can't imagine that day, for every thought you have on every discrete standard within every content, across K-12, would there be time for that? So I guess all I'm saying is I would hope there'd be a lot of thought have already been given, and if there's things you want to see changed, that we have a chance to do that before we bring them forth.
Right. We value all the time that's put in here by staff and educators across the state and so forth and so on. That's not the point. The point is that there may be some philosophical or conceptual disagreements on particular components of it.
Absolutely.
And I have not talked to my colleagues on this board about it because I knew on the 28th we would have a broad discussion. And so I've seen that as the ultimate opportunity to have a broad-based discussion as well as to vote on it. And it's not to in any way
provide negativity toward the process. It's to honor those who have spent their time. But on the other hand, we have a responsibility not to accept it carte blanche and just say, people worked on it, therefore,
And I hope that's not what
we're
I'm
going
trying
to
to,
approve it.
I don't want you to think that's what I'm saying. I'm just wanting us to be able to continue with our goal, which is to get this to the educators before their summer vacation. I mean, all along, we've said at every meeting, let's try to make sure our teachers go home this summer knowing what it is they're coming back to teach. So I guess if there are large philosophical debates or things we should be considering, that we are certainly dialoguing with each other, the sooner the better.
So a good review of the standards when they come out next week
Would be
is
excellent.
great.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So again, this just reiterates what I think I've already said, which is the College Inquiry Panel is coming back together on the 11th. I want to go to the next slide, because the College Inquiry Panel actually has been heavily involved with the Commission for Higher Education. And they are going to be asked, because remember, we have two kind of evaluation or approval processes. We have our State Education Roundtable and the State Board of Education, but then we also, because we are potentially having to showcase that these are deemed college and career ready in Indiana to the U.S. Department of Education, what did our process look like? So we are asking our College and Career Ready panel to identify which part of the standards, this is an example from English Language Arts, did they review and did they approve them? So we have some evidence to give to Commissioner Lubbers. Oh, I'm sorry, it's behind your head. You guys can't
You're
see.
looking at something, but we're not.
There we go, sorry. So Friday will be led by the Commission for Higher Education with our College and Career Ready panel to say, you have reviewed this, do you deem it college and career ready, and sign off on each one of them. And that's all.
Dan, did you have a comment?
Are we going to incorporate a little preamble or as suggested?
By Dr. Oliver.
You know, there was also a part here, and I've read through some of the testimony, I sat there, and I think by design we couldn't speak, but there was a conflating of a standard to methods to teaching materials. In other words, I think we ought to have a brief explanation. There's a standard, and what different people around the country use to teach that standard is a teacher decision and a principal and a teacher and a local board, et cetera. I thought that got all confused and started some people saying, my goodness, the material in these standards is going to be terrible for our children, when I think it was just a case of mistaken identity. They were talking about materials and curriculum and not a standard. So I would like some delineation of that, because I think it's caused some,
Yes.
and frankly, I've appreciated the fact so many parents were interested in education. So I don't want to discourage that, but I thought sometimes we were talking oranges and apples in a few
And I think that can be included, as you mentioned, in the preamble, but also in everything we do with architecture and articulation that goes forth. We want to definitely put out with our standards for the public consumption. We talked about that implementation idea, that differentiation between curriculum instruction and standards. I believe Michelle has a comment. she'd
Michelle,
like
did
to
you have a
provide.
comment?
I just want to offer a clarification. Based on a 2004 Attorney General opinion, it's my belief that the board has to take an up or down vote on the standards as they are recommended by the Education Roundtable. The Roundtable would have the opportunity to make modification, but this board, by my reading of that opinion, does not have that authority.
Oh,
So,
David?
clarification, so if we want to make any kind of change to it, then we have to vote no. And what's the implications of voting no on the 28th?
Then our standards would continue to remain in
I
this
don't know what they,
unclear state.
we would have.
Those were revoked by statute, weren't they?
No, they are not. The 2010 standards will be void once we approve new standards.
So then
So
we
we're
would go back.
operating under the Indiana academic standards. Common Core is obviously not in operation. So when I say they would remain in this unclear state, what I meant was what we would be transitioning to would remain unclear for
That is
schools.
correct.
So would we be back to the 2010 Indiana standards if
Well,
we vote no on the 28th?
Presumably, what would happen is the Education Roundtable would have to meet yet again and offer up a new recommendation to the board. But again, the disadvantage of that would be that our practitioners would still not know what they were transitioning to.
Gordon? Oh, Andrea, sorry, I thought Gordon had his hand up.
Okay, so if we have to do an up or down vote, and we vote no, then we need a Plan B. So as I've been suggesting all along, it would behoove us to submit our prior standards, 2000 math, 2006 English language arts, to the College and Career Ready panel for a college and career ready evaluation. So if we end up voting no on the proposed standards, we'll have those in our back pocket. And I've suggested all along it would be good to have that information. So I'd like to propose now that we go ahead and get that done in the meantime. We'd have a backup plan should we need it.
Andrea, we've already evaluated all of those standards within the process that we're doing right now. Michelle, if you could stay there right where you are. So I just want to be clear. The 1427, we are teaching standards right now. 1427 also says that we must have new standards adopted by July 2014. And so we have set our April 28th meeting to get that finished so that we can ensure that our teachers have the summer in which to look at their standards and begin to have planning for implementation. So comments, public comments, board comments, whatever, need to happen prior to the 21st. The roundtable may also give recommendations for some changes, of which may happen between the 21st and the 28th. You might get even another draft sent to you. But the process is pretty clear. It's a process that's been always used, actually, in standards. It goes to the roundtable. The roundtable makes the recommendation to the board. The board has a vote. I thought actually some changes could be made at that point, but you're letting me know that's not really how it works. So I guess we all know how important it is that we review these standards and get anything to you that from a board's perspective that we might want to do. So do we email Danielle directly or Molly?
That's what Molly and I
Okay.
were just discussing. We'd be happy to have you directly email us the
Okay.
specific feedback.
So that can go, that can even, the
Does that
career
affect-
panel, though, will have finished its work by which date?
This Friday.
Okay, totally.
Totally. So what you will have
Okay.
seen, they will have signed off on. They will have deemed them to be what students in Indiana know and should be able to do to be college and career ready according to their lens. and our
So let
definition.
me put one more thing here in the mix.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the roundtable makes changes, if there are more changes made after they have deemed college and career ready, there will have to be another meeting.
We've warned them of that. We've
Okay,
warned both
so
our
they know that.
We've actually warned the evaluation team and the college career ready panel team
Okay.
that some of the feedback through this, even after,
Because we're
we may
not
come
going to
back.
adopt standards that are not college and
Career
career
ready,
ready.
correct,
They
yes.
must be. And that's the process by which they really get stamped with that little
And again, they've
mark.
been used to this differentiation. For example, the geometry team had a WebEx this week because there was some more work to be done there. So it may be that there's one part of the college and career ready panel, the entire panel, they are well aware that that could happen.
Did you also want to talk about mathematics courses while you were
Oh,
up here?
thank you for mentioning that, yes. So historically, when math standards have come before the roundtable and the State Board of Education, they have been through algebra. We are bringing forth, based on the feedback from the educators, not just through algebra, but also 7 courses of mathematics, including finite, calculus, pre-calc. I don't have all my 7 in front of me, but I just want to make you aware when you receive your draft, because our educators felt strongly they needed the standards by course, as well as some of the feedback we received, you will get those in addition beyond the algebra standards.
And we had several of that testimony that happened at the hearings
Yes.
regarding that aspect.
Thank you for that reminder.
Okay, thank you. 10:05 update, Michelle Walker,
I'm introducing this one as well.
okay? And I believe you have the information.
You have a memo that came out in your original board packet from me to you. I mentioned at our last meeting that there were other parts of 1005 beyond AccuPlacer that we would need to discuss. And so this one is coming before you today as information and likely with a proposed action for the next board meeting. So one of the components of 1005 requires that the state board, in consultation with the Department of Education, needs to develop criteria to be used by the Indiana Department of Education to identify secondary schools with high graduation waiver rate percentages, and therefore, based on what you deem to be high. So in other words, what you're going to need to decide upon is what is a number for which, if a school exceeds it, would you expect for them to have put into action a plan for lowering that number, okay? So we are coming before you today with the data over the last 5 years of what those rates have been, hoping to inform you so you can say next month, we think this number is the right number. And then at that time, we would say to any school, if your number exceeds this, we would like for you to include in your school improvement plan action items for how that school would choose to lower that number. So Michelle's going to give you that data and actually give you some options to consider.
Okay, so this is another component of 1005 that we've not yet acted upon, and we're getting information today, and we will take action later. Okay, great.
I feel like a bookend.
You are.
The beginning and the end. So what I would like to do is, as Danielle indicated, I want to talk you through just 3 options for your consideration that we can talk in more detail about at our meeting in May. If you want more data, I have plenty with me, and we can certainly do other data runs. So let me explain what we have, what our recommendations are for your consideration.
And do we have a copy of this?
No, it's just
So,
it's 2
Laura,
slides.
we'll get it to them. Thank you, thank you.
It's just this and then the options.
Sure.
So let me get my right and left hands going. So what Danielle's already outlined very eloquently is really the first bullet on this slide, and that is that part of 1005 requires you as a board to set a criteria, or a criterion, if you will, to determine when, in fact, schools need to have a specific plan around how to reduce the number of graduation waivers that are given to students, based on the fact that they're trying to meet those learning needs as best they can so that students hopefully are demonstrating proficiency and would not need a waiver to demonstrate their proficiency, but would do so on the, in this case, ECAs of Algebra 1 and English 10. There was a subcommittee of the committee of department staff that worked on this particular aspect. We did pull 5 years worth of data, and we narrowed it down to the last 3 years because the waiver requirements and the waiver definitions with regard to the criteria that's listed in legislative statute with regard to the waiver were consistent for the last 3 years. So we felt like we really needed to be looking at apples to apples.
And so those are the ones that are listed in our memo?
Yes. And
Okay.
so Danielle, I think, is, pointed to those in her opening remarks. And it's not new information, so the waiver process has not changed. Really what's new is for you to establish kind of a benchmark that says if you exceed a certain percentage of waivers in a graduating class, that really there needs to be some plans in place at the school to address those students' learning needs for the future. So the 3 options that we selected 10%, and we actually looked, I want to give you just a little bit of background. We actually looked at 4 what I'll call buckets or categories. We looked at those schools who actually had fewer than 10% of the students receiving a graduation waiver. So the remaining students actually received a diploma based on passing both ECAs. The second category was between 10 and 14%. The third one was 15 to 19%, and the fourth one was 20% and greater. And so what we did was we actually looked at a period of, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me just talk about your options, and then the next slide shows you the data. So option A is looking at if a school actually exceeds 10% of the graduates receiving a waiver 3 consecutive years. So 3 years in a row, greater than 10%, that would be one option that you might select. As, again, we're bringing some
And so that
selections to you.
means if they have that, then they would make a remediation plan?
Right.
So that they would not
Right.
have that high a number? Okay.
That's right. Whatever your criteria that you decide on to move forward with schools, that is the criteria that will then indicate to the school you need to have a plan.
Okay, so we can either choose, the recommendations is
Absolutely.
10% over 3 years, over 2 years, or over 1?
Right,
Okay.
right. Again, I have the data on the other categories. If you'd like to know what that is, I can certainly answer that today and pull more data for you. But as the superintendent's already indicated, the three options really are looking at 10%, so that did not change. So we're looking at any school that exceeds 10% or 1 in 10 students over a period of 1 year, 2 year, or 3 years. When we look at the data, something I want to point out about these data, so option A is pretty general in terms of the 3 years. We looked at 2011 graduates, 2012, and 2013. And almost half of the schools actually fell into one of the, well, I should say 3 of the 4 buckets. So the first category was, again, less than 10%. So about half of the schools over a 3-year period actually experienced having students anywhere from 10% on up that actually received a waiver. So if this isn't making sense, interrupt me and I can try to backtrack. But
Go ahead.
Some of them actually were in the 10 to 14, some were in the 15 to 19, and so on. So I just want to make sure that you realize that over time, they might have had very few the first year, maybe a lot the second year, maybe very few the third year, for example. But they still were past that 10% threshold. For the second option, we actually looked at 2011 and 12 as the 2 years consecutively, as well as 2012 and 2013. And you'll see here that in the 11-12 comparison, a little less than half, now it's 44.9% of the schools actually would be writing a plan if this were the criteria that was established. In this particular instance, if you think that looking at 2 years in a row would be an important value for you.
So is the number in option A, is that half of the schools that even gave waivers? Is it half of all schools?
Half of all schools that administered the ECAs that actually had graduates.
Okay, so it's not about whether they gave waivers or not.
No.
Literally,
Because some
half
of
of
the
our
schools actually gave 0 waivers.
All right, so
And there's the
literally
data
half
as
of our
well.
schools
Yes.
fell into this category.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
But again, oftentimes they were just a little bit over 10%, like
correct.
10.1%, and on up would actually put them into this
Sure.
category.
And if you're a very, very small high school, that
Exactly.
could just be a few kids.
Because one of the things we did, we had actually done a lot of data analysis, to be honest with you, over the last week or so. And we looked at size of school, just a variety of things, and realized that it's probably not the size of the school, but really the percent of students that are needing this that would impact the school really needing a plan to address it.
Okay.
In 2012-13, it was considerably lower, just a little over a quarter of the schools actually. So you can tell that over time, if you look at the 12-13 data for option B, schools are actually getting better at helping their students graduate by having passed the ECAs. The last option, option C, is looking at just in a single year, so the need for them to create, as part of their school improvement plan, a remediation plan to address student learning needs would be something that would be conducted on an annual basis. So Part C is annually. And we did, again, look at the 3 years. In 2011, about a quarter of the schools. In 2012, it was closer to, well, more than a third, actually. And 2013 was a little more than a third as well. So my goal was not really to inundate you with data, but to give you some idea of what percent of the schools are we talking about in each of the options. And you might have some questions, and you might even have some questions about the different categories of students.
Are we also going to have to determine for how long they make a plan?
So that's a great question. Let's say, for example, that as a board, you decide to use option C. So in that case, it's on an annual basis. When the graduation rate is calculated, for example, if they're exceeding 10%, then in their next year's school improvement plan, they would need to address remediation efforts. If you would pick option B, we'd be looking at a 2-year pattern, so every other year they might need to add that into their school improvement plan. And option A, in a 3-year pattern, every 3rd year they may need to add that into their school improvement plan. Does that help? That might be an easier way for you to think about that. Again, we really don't need any action today, just wanted to share with you From the department's perspective, 3 options that we think, you have other options. If you want to look at higher, we can give you as much information as you would like to have, but we want to try to keep it at one set of recommendations with several options, and then you let us know if you'd like to know more about the data.
Just from a policy standpoint, why do we permit this at all? I mean, this, I can understand maybe, you know, someone was in a car accident and couldn't take the ECA or something, but this, to me, seems far too liberal in its use. And, I mean, anytime you say if half of the schools in Indiana are doing more than 10% of these waivers, that really seems almost abusive of what should be an extreme exception in my mind for having a graduation waiver.
Let me talk about 2 things, if I may, very quickly. One is why we actually have waivers in our policy as a state, and 2, I want to give you the first set of between 10% and 14% for the 3-year, because that's where the schools really are sitting. They're just barely above 10, even though we're saying it's everything above 10. That's why I thought you might want to know more about the data. But most of you probably are aware that because in Indiana, a diploma is actually considered a property right, we have a responsibility as a state to have additional ways that students can demonstrate their knowledge, skills, and abilities as per required by our graduation qualifying exam. So since Algebra 1 and English 10 are the GQE right now, if the student over multiple opportunities is unable to demonstrate the skills, but they have the skills, some students are poor test takers, so that might be an example. Maybe the student actually had a very serious illness and they were out of school for an extended period, and so they missed some opportunities. I mean, I think we, as a state, tried to say they must have the skills, and the majority of students will demonstrate that by scoring proficiently on the Algebra 1, the English 10 ECA. But for those who don't, if they meet the criteria that you actually have in the memo that's outlined for the waiver, then that is another way that they could actually earn a diploma. But does that answer your question? I don't know if you're
it answers my question.
Okay.
I still don't really like it. I mean, especially, I think Illinois recently amended their standards where Algebra 1 is now being in their accountability for 8th grade. You know, so now we're saying we're giving people waivers on Algebra 1 to graduate from 12th grade.
I understand your
But
concern.
it is in state law.
Yes, I
They're permitted,
understand your
Dan?
concern.
Yeah, I probably need a question or even a clarification.
Sure.
Moving the needle on this is a long-term process. Does the
Yes.
district put together the plan or the school?
It's at the school level, according to HEA 1005, because different schools within the same corporation. We did, in all of our data, we looked at individual schools.
Or you could
because-
do a school and insist on district involvement, because there's a process
Definitely.
how
You're
you
right.
get to 12th grade typically
And I
without
think that
those
could be part of
skills.
the board's recommendation as well, is that it should be systemic.
And then moving the needle on this, you may have solution variable in time depending on what criteria we select, or criterion if it comes down to one. Because some are longer-term solutions if you have within the 10 or 15 or 20% waivers, if you can identify chronic problems, then you need a little
More time.
larger time
That's right.
frame. So I'd like to see some variables
Sure.
as we think about this, because it has to get corrected, because as usual, Tony's right. This is not a good situation where we think, well, 1 out of 10, we'll just kind of sign those guys through. I don't think that's not a goal of ours, huh?
Carrie?
And this kind of leads, let me say one quick comment if I may. This leads a little bit also into the discussion we'll have next with the subcommittee and talking about what should our graduation test look like for the future. And so as a board, you may decide that you want to do, for example, option C, an annual 1 year at a time, because you would like to make a change to the actual graduation qualifying exam. So again, that I think would be, as Mr. Elsner is asking about factors, I think that's a factor as well.
I had a question about our special needs students and their inclusion in the number. Because our 6th grade this year, I think, is at 9.5%, our special needs. And so our students, some of them are off diploma track.
Right.
If they're not on a diploma track, I don't think they're included in this group. We're talking about those who actually received a diploma, what % of those were given a waiver?
Right.
But still, you know, there would be some classes, you know, the number fluctuates, and we have a higher number this year, but at 9.5%, we're sitting close to that number.
Yeah, but don't
If
we
they're
have
on
to
a
be fair?
non-diploma track, though, they will not be in the data, just to
There
be
will be a
clear.
denominator.
The
Right.
special needs would, but not the ones who are not on diploma track.
And we need, I need to understand that, as we said.
So that would be a piece of information that we might want, of the information that you give, how many of them might be special needs,
with
even though they were on a
disabilities.
diploma track.
Because I do think that factors into a large number of special needs students in a certain year. It could numbers in a way that would look like you need remediation, when in fact those students were serviced.
And so the plans really are to create a plan so that more children will pass Algebra 1.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, that's really what we're asking the schools to do.
Absolutely. And we're not talking about a student remediation plan in this case, we're talking about a school plan or school action item within their school improvement plan to address this. And I would say, if I knew my data was in 1 year high because of our special needs population was extraordinarily higher than in previous years, my action would reflect how we, you know what I mean? So I think there's room for differentiation when those situations arise too.
Roy?
But isn't that the statement you just made? We're talking cohorts. So we're talking cohort A and cohort B are going to be totally different. And the second thing that I would say as my concern is the number of waivers. Those kids did actually pass all those classes, and they deserve to have something. Otherwise, they're not going to be, as Gordon said earlier in the meeting, they're not going to be ready for the workforce. You know, if you don't have stuff for some of these kids, we're going to lose those kids, and our dropout rate's going to increase. You got a sliding scale here. And I want you to be very careful. 10% in a school of 100 students is 10 students.
And that's why the options, like I think Michelle was alluding to, you can say, we want this to be 5%, and I think, or 15, and so this is all open for you to understand and to make recommendation.
I just think that over a 3-year period of time, you're going to have 3 different sets of problems that would have occurred.
Sure.
Because you might have had a high population of special ed in one class, and you might had a apathy in a second class and something else in a third class. I mean, poor math skills. So I mean, that you got to be very careful about doing a school improvement plan, because if it was over a 3-year period of time, our targets will change each time, and that makes it difficult for schools to do.
And option C would probably be what you.
Well, yeah, option C actually aligns with our school improvement process we have in place now. It's annual.
It does. I mean, you haven't asked us for our recommendation, and really it's your call, obviously. I think option C probably gives the school the most flexibility because they can adjust and fight based on the cohorts of students.
But isn't it after the fact? It hasn't been anything that has been an intervention.
It
So
is.
then it's kind of an after the fact. So really, we're not going to correct the issue. We're going to put a Band-Aid on a past issue, and hopefully it doesn't happen again. I really have a lot of difficulty in understanding why putting it after the fact instead of before.
So I think because, as Danielle, do you want to grab it? I think the challenge for you as a board is that the legislation actually requires you to set a criteria or criterion, obviously.
I'm not
As you're
arguing.
smiling. And, you know, one of the things that we talked a lot about in our work group is, and so what is the consequence to the school? The consequence is that they actually would address how they would help other students coming up the next year who might actually need more academic support. So it's, I mean, I think it's all positive about how it's addressing students' needs if there are the next year students that they identify, say in the fall, that are in danger of not obtaining a diploma, for example.
I think they're just wanting some intentionality on the part of the school to be sure that they're keeping a lookout for that and making sure that they're addressing it. Dan?
My colleague you know, you're making a good point, Troy, but most everything that happens in the world that we create improvement plans on are in the past. And our friends that presented for a good long time earlier talked about root causes. So if you have a cohort that goes through and 10 students, you had to waive them because they couldn't do the material. So I don't think it's so bad that, yeah, they're gone off in the world. You might want to look at the root cause and try to see from that cohort what future cohorts could avoid, and you'd have more legitimate, I don't want to call them illegitimate, but you'd have people who could graduate without a waiver. And so I don't think that's all that bad that, I mean, I'd like to do it beforehand, but that's kind of how improvement processes work. You see something you don't like at the end of the line, and you go back, find root cause, say, let's fix it.
And you might want to, as a board, actually include some of that language in your guidance for schools around what you determine to be the actual criteria or criterion, and say, and here's some things you need to be considering. What are root causes? How do you identify students earlier? Things of that nature you might want to include as well.
David?
Since we value continuous improvement, and this is probably an issue for every school in Indiana, why wouldn't this be an infrastructure issue that every school in their continuous improvement plan have a system listed for addressing this? Rather than dealing with 10% or 15% or 2%, it really doesn't matter. Every school needs to be addressing this in some way, and I believe every school is. If it's part of our continuous improvement plan, then we can monitor it, or the school can monitor it, and place an emphasis and a priority on making sure that it does happen. So would that be a fifth option, is to just build it into a continuous improvement plan?
I think we'll obviously go back and check in the language of 1005, because I think you have to set a number, but what we probably want to double check is, could you actually say that every school should have this as part of their way of doing business?
Right, so is 0 a number in the legislation?
Well, it could be.
Or point?
0 is a number.
0.0001?
That's right. So you have plenty to think about between now and your May meeting.
And I guess what we really were hoping for, if there was any data that we didn't reflect here today, are there things you wonder about the waivers, corp data, school data, cohort, that we could provide you to think about before next month, or anything else that could be helpful?
Yeah, just one last comment. I mean, because in my mind, this really, over the long term, undermines the credibility of Indiana diplomas. I mean, an employer that's sitting looking to hire someone, they probably don't know that the kid's diploma was granted based on a waiver and they really couldn't pass Algebra 1. And this has real economic impact. For example, the top 2 cities in this country for H-1B visas. I mean, many of you probably know H-1B visas are limited, they're capped, they're coveted. A lot of high-tech companies use them to get what they consider high-tech value-added employees into this country. Guess where the number 2 number of H-1B visas are? Columbus, Indiana, right here, 111 miles from Purdue University. Cummins, who's probably the #1 culprit of it, has one of the highest populations right here in our backyard of H-1B visas. And what they're saying to us is, we're not hiring recruiting at Purdue. We're not getting your kids coming out of Columbus Signature or somewhere else. We're going overseas, largely to India, it seems right now, from just appearances of things, and bringing employees here to take top jobs at Cummins here in Columbus, Indiana. And I can't help but see the relatedness between this and everything else that we're doing here and that reality, because whatever grades and accountability that we're saying about schools and education in Indiana, what is Cummins saying? Thanks.
So if you have more data that you'd like to see, let Danielle or Michelle know, and we'll make sure we get it to you. Thank you very much. Roosevelt Academy update. I know you received a memo regarding this topic.
I don't have a formal presentation. You received the memo, and I apologize that you did not receive it until yesterday, but we were obviously waiting on the numbers, and we only received them recently. If you have any questions, I would be happy to respond.
So pretty much, just summing it up. You know, we've got a lot of information here about what needs to be done, what needs to be fixed, but we don't necessarily have any way for it to get fixed, except for the school corporation to try to get it fixed. So there are no options to gain more money or to have grant opportunities to actually fix the building. Is that correct?
That would be correct. It walks through what the possibilities would be, including the statutory provisions that we talked about, I think, in January. But those, of course, are advances to the school corporation, requires them to take on debt. Another option would be if the state board were to try to create perhaps a grant through its own fund. But the concern for that is that there doesn't seem to be clear statutory authority, and OMB indicated that because of that, they might have an inability to approve it. The other option would be the adverse action provision, but one, I question whether the board, with all evidence in front of it, would be able to make that determination. Of course, it would require an AOPA-style proceeding. I also would have concerns about the impact of such a decision because of the somewhat severe financial position that Gary Community School Corporation is in and the potential impact on the students in the other schools.
Okay.
So yes, I guess the summary is there aren't a lot of options other than if the corporation were to request an advancement, but because of what I just said, that they are in a severe financial situation, the corporation is not interested in taking on more debt at this point.
Thank you. Tony?
You know, the state's running a great billboard campaign up in Lake County. They have big billboards, say, Indiana, a state of problem solvers and innovators. And I believe that's true. We have a problem here, and we have not yet come up with the way to fix it, but a way to fix it does exist, and I have faith we'll find it. Thanks.
Well, who's the we?
I mean, the people that took the school over.
Yeah, but we didn't take, there's parameters around that takeover, and there's people with taxing authority and management, and they've entered into contracts and spent all their money and can't take care of I don't know how large their budget is there in Gary, but we're not looking at a mammoth bill here, and I would think, yeah, the we should take care of it, but the right we. I just feel bad for the students too all this time over this, and there's been a lot of emails and I suppose lawyers and administrators' time. Yeah, if you have children in a school building, you should take care of them. And you make sure you budget enough, you don't overcommit to other things, you can't take care of your buildings. So if we were to start, if this was the we that takes care of it, I'm just wondering what kind of message that sends to the problem solvers in the community.
Are any students, teachers, or employees at any material risk because of the existing conditions relating to deferred maintenance?
I don't know if I'm in a position, if I have the expertise to make that assessment. I forwarded to you all of the reports. It did seem that on the mold issue that they did not think that the students were in locations that had any kind of concerns, that they seemed to be placed in safe areas. The most recent water leak, I did request to find out whether that was addressed. It took a few days, but that was addressed. I don't know whether there is new mold because of the new water leak, and given that it took a few days to get to. So the unfortunate thing is I'm a lawyer and I can't always determine about whether there are those sorts of concerns with the building. That's why we sent the architect in from IDOA. I think that they
But you've
right now have
reviewed the reports.
I have, and it does seem, and I've been in the building several times, and in the last few weeks, I think twice, maybe 3 times. And the classrooms I visited, they do not have visible mold. Students are at comfortable temperatures. While some of the pictures do show some rooms with broken glass or torn up floors, students are not going to those rooms. But I don't know if there are other issues because of the most recent water leak. I guess that's why I'm being somewhat cautious in what I state, because we did just have this very recent water leak. But even with the water leaks of December and January, there were not mold concerns for those students.
And who, in your legal opinion, is responsible for ongoing maintenance, not necessarily capital repairs, but ongoing repairs and maintenance, you know, for if there's a water leak or, you know?
So to some degree, it's a shared responsibility. The statute's pretty specific that Gary Community School Corporation is responsible for the repair and maintenance of the building, but there's a very important caveat at the end of that statutory language that says consistent with the buildings and the rest of the corporation. And as I think everyone is familiar with, the several buildings in the Gary Community School Corporation have some issues. But while the statute sounds somewhat clear, there is a shared services agreement between Edison Learning and Gary Community School Corporation, and it specifies who is responsible for which duties. Because as we all know, especially either folks who have worked in schools or we lawyers, what constitutes repair and maintenance starts to get complicated in a school building where you obviously have to have janitorial service. You have to make sure that you're providing appropriate supervision of students, because then lack of doing that can suddenly turn into a problem that creates a repair issue, and that can be difficult for a school corporation to keep up with. So it's a shared responsibility, and that's why we spent a lot of time, including both administrations, trying to get that mediation agreement or the shared services agreement in place between the corporation and the special management team.
For that agreement, who's responsible?
They both are. They both have specific provisions, and to be perfectly honest, I've seen both of them not fulfill their responsibilities. For example,
On this issue, who's responsible?
a little bit of both. So the repair and maintenance, I would say, generally speaking, in terms of the mold and the maintenance of the boilers, things like that, that looks like the sort of thing that would be Gary. At the same time, 2 weeks ago, we were there and there was an ongoing water leak, but the shared services agreement seems to specify that Edison Learning would be responsible for turning that off. So I think that we have a very difficult situation anytime that you have two entities trying to both repair and maintain a building. And unfortunately, Unfortunately, that relationship has continued to be somewhat troubled, and they haven't always both met their responsibilities under the shared services agreement.
Well, we really have two parties that don't really have the money to do what's needed to be done. That's the bottom line. Okay, last item.
So is there a go forward, or we
But there's
just?
no action that the board needs to take. You know, we want to inform you. I think we've had ongoing conversations with Dr. Pruitt. I think she was grateful to get the information, and the information that we did send to her. She has to go to her board. She has to decide what it is that she can do and how she can fix it. So, you know, I was in several Gary buildings just not long ago. Half of a building is being used because the roof can't be repaired in the other half. So there's ongoing repair issues in general in Gary schools.
Is there anything that the Department of Education or the State Board of Education can do in situations where a district is not maintaining its schools that potentially puts children and employees and teachers at risk?
Michelle? I'm not aware of anything, except some of the things that we went through to try to get information to the school district. He wants to know if the department is responsible in any way for making sure that buildings are maintained.
I wouldn't say that, I think that, to be honest,
We certainly have no funds.
Right, so I think that both.
Not necessarily just responsible for, but is there any leverage that the department has to ensure that the school buildings are in appropriate levels and kids aren't at risk?
So, based on my familiarity with the statutes that apply to the board and the superintendent and the department, I do not think, I am not aware of a statutory provision that places that sort of responsibility on any of the three entities. I do think that the State Department of Health, they do the inspections for schools, but we have some of the attorneys for the department here if anyone has something to add to that.
Gordon, I would say that this is a different situation because of the fact that the state board has assumed jurisdiction over it, therefore have a responsibility for the public health and safety of the kids and the workers, different from other schools in general.
And I will be forward that I made the most creative arguments that I could to try to tell you that you had the option of creating perhaps a grant out of your own dollars, but the concern is that there's just not the statutory authority to clearly allow for that.
Even if we had the statutory authority, you're opening up an unbelievable system, because then why would the local board be responsible? They might as well say, you know, the states, I mean, we didn't go in there and take over responsibility at school because it was a delightful occasion and we wanted to do that. There were children that we had chronically failing school there. We need to put another operator in there. And so we took care of our responsibility, I think. We didn't say we would operate their facilities. And if we start doing it, we'll operate a lot of them.
Okay, we're ready for REPA 3, which is the very last item. You have a copy. The topic that we're going to be speaking about today is only one portion of REPA 3 and revolves around the adjunct permit. Last time that we had discussion on the various areas in REPA 3, this item, we had multiple viewpoints and multiple suggestions for language. And so what you're seeing here today in front of you is the current language, which is adjunct. And I might add there was a lot of conversation about deleting this portion of REPA 3 as well. But we also have with us some proposed language just to let you know what it might look like if it looked different. So ladies, we're wanting to try to wrap things up as quickly as we can because we have another meeting today.
In the discussion that you had last month, there were a number of comments and suggestions made about the proposed section called adjunct permit. And what Michelle and I have done is bring back some sample language that incorporated some of the comments and suggestions that were made last month by you about ways that you might modify the adjunct language to make it more acceptable to you. The top of well, first you have the existing language, and then you have the language that is sampled and changes. We're just trying to get some additional guidance from you as to what direction you want us to go, so that we know what to draft to bring back when we bring back a more final document with the rest of the changes in it too. Certainly, one of the viable options is to eliminate the section on adjunct permit completely. That's still a viable option. But based on some of your comments and suggestions, we did this sample for you. And I think if you look at the proposed language, the things that were added based on your comments last month are
they're
noted
in pink.
In pink,
So
right.
that you can see.
Right, so you can look quickly and see what changes we made.
So the first change is a new name.
Yes, and basically, to summarize, it's bullets 2 through 5 of the PowerPoint. So obviously, as Risa commented, we could eliminate. Then the next several bullets are addressed in the language in front of you, which would limit it to the secondary level, require advance approval of the pedagogy program providers by the board, shortens it to a 2-year span rather than a 5-year span, adds a work hours requirement. There was a lot of conversation about wanting to get individuals who had been out in the professions and careers and give them a pathway into the classroom. This would also minimize the risk of just getting someone straight out of college who didn't bring that perspective of being out in the workforce to the field and also didn't have the pedagogy training. And it changes the name because there have been comments about an adjunct gives the impression that it's a part-time. So because a lot of this is starting to look a little bit like the workplace specialist license, which is what we use in CTE, we called it the career specialist. But all of these are up for amendment. We just wanted to provide it to get the discussion going.
Yes, Brad?
I've been looking at this. Where I'm struggling is if, even if you say you require advance approval of the pedagogy program, I get that. But what's the monitoring thereafter to ensure that there's compliance? Because as I read what was drafted in the language, it basically says you could go the route of the corporation providing PD for that pedagogy, you could have a standalone vendor provide it, you could have a university provide it. And I'm just wondering, if you prove it up front and you say, okay, well, you've shown us a program, it looks like you're doing it. I know what the current follow-up is for those that are approved right now under REPA to offer that pedagogy requirement. There's a lot of reporting we do annually even. So I don't see that language. That makes me a little nervous when I'm not seeing the monitoring there.
So I think that it comes first from the pedagogy provider would submit a plan to the department who would review and then make a recommendation to the board for whether or not it would be approved. The second piece is at the time that the candidate would apply for a renewal. So after the first 2 years, that candidate has to provide evidence and documentation that they had completed the pedagogy program that was approved.
I don't think there's anything that would prevent us. That's what you're really looking at, is how do we monitor that they continue to offer the program as it was approved in advance. And something similar, but maybe not as intense as the higher ed.
I'm just going to give my comment I gave last time, that we have a myriad of ways in which somebody can become a teacher in the classroom. And this is still, no matter what you call it, a far lowering of standards to become a teacher. So it doesn't do anything for me. And of course, I was pretty vocal on deleting it at the start, but I don't see it addressing the quality that we need. I mean, we just did a report on educator effectiveness, and I'm about putting the most effective teachers we have that we can, have trained. I'm not about necessarily training them as we go. So that's my 2 cents worth. Andrea?
My concern is we're going to dilute this to the point that we might as well not bother. I would rather have an up and down vote on a robust adjunct permit and see where the vote ends up than create something that's not worth doing. We're talking about, just this morning, teacher effectiveness and the process we have in place to evaluate teacher effectiveness and making that more robust. Any teacher who's hired through an adjunct process will be subject to the same teacher effectiveness accountability system. So I think it's foolish to worry about accountability on the front end. Let's get them in the system, and then if they fail, they're not accountable, then they're not going to last long. We're not requiring principals to hire anyone who doesn't have a license. We're giving them flexibility. And, all the studies show that the quality of an educational system cannot exceed the quality of the teachers. We're creating a outlet, a creative way for principals to look for highly effective teachers in their content area. I understand the concern about the term adjunct, but to me, career specialist permit is some of that meaningless edgy jargon that I'd like to get rid of. I'd rather call it a content expert permit, because that's what we're encouraging principals to go out and find. Content experts who can teach with, and with experience in mentoring and guidance could possibly become expert teachers.
Brad?
I'd like to ask a question, because how is that different from the flexibility we have now? I mean, right now,
Right now, we have that.
what Andrea just described, I can make the argument, I think, that we have that flexibility right now. The only thing that I'm seeing that this would change is it removes the monitoring of the programs responsible for making sure that they enforce what they said they were going to do when their programs were approved, which was the secondary TTT sequence.
Currently have an alternative path transition to teaching, which requires the individual to already hold a degree, and it puts them through an abbreviated pedagogy program that has been submitted and reviewed and approved in a regular review cycle of the other programs that the institutions have. So we do already have something very similar to this. There's also an alternative path that was legislated called advanced degree, which is for individuals who hold a master's or higher in their content area and have passed their content test and have a year of some kind of teaching experience, either at the K-12 or 512 level, because they're only available for secondary content areas, or in the higher ed realm. So there are currently two alternative paths that require a content major and content expertise already.
So what type of guidance are you looking for us? Now, Andrea, I heard you say this is a pretty big ticket, I think. When we get to a vote of the entire rule, it could go up or down depending on this item alone. And so I tend to think maybe it might not be a bad idea, perhaps, to vote at some time at the next meeting. Perhaps it wouldn't take long to just say, do we want it or we don't want it, so we know how to inform them on where to go. So Michelle, I'm asking you, is that even something we can consider?
Sure, and
Okay.
I would applaud that approach, because the document
Then you would
is
know.
roughly 80 pages, and a change of whether this item is included or not will change nearly every citation. So including all the internal references and history lines, so it takes quite a while to draft the document and make sure that it's accurate. So we would certainly like to have the guidance in advance whether to even include this language, and that's why we continue to bring it back to you to get input and discussion about what you are hoping to see in that final
So we're not in some big hurry to get this done, so we could put this on the May agenda to just really as an action item to say, hey, what do we want to do with this, and give you information, right?
Well, I don't think that we're in a rush, but at the same time, we have, the rulemaking was begun last May, and we've already filed an AROC. So we'll need to take action.
Well, do we need to have it
By summer,
briefly
which
on-
I think is already our plan.
Okay, then I think we would be fine in May.
3 comments for you on the draft that you proposed in section 6A. Talks about a 2-year renewable permit. Doesn't say anything about how many times you may renew it. Is it indefinite? And so I would ask you to,
As long as the requirements are met for the renewal, which are
okay, so then I would ask you to put that somewhere in here, that it is renewable in perpetuity. As long as they meet the requirements.
Yes.
Because that's going to get a question that we're going to get. Section 6.1, you talk about applying to secondary level. I think we may need a definition of what you mean by secondary level. Some schools are 812, some schools are 912. And I think you mean secondary level in an academic discipline.
You mean
Isn't
high
that-
school, right?
You mean high school level 912? So what about a middle school?
Secondary, for licensure purposes, includes middle school and high school. So our secondary coverage is 512 on secondary.
So grade 512, if I'm teaching just a not discipline-specific fifth grade, then I could apply this?
That would be elementary education, and this would not include the ability content area at the secondary level.
Okay. And my final comment, at the last meeting, I proposed, and I'm not sure if you've forgotten, it's not in here, or you thought my comment had no merit, either way, I'm going to state it again. The concept being that to have some kind of an experience for this individual prior to actually teaching. So maybe a summer event or a summer module or something prior to throwing someone into the classroom that they would have to have an approved experience. And we could designate a pedagogy or whatever we want to do. But if we do go ahead and pass this, I would think it'd be important to have that individual have some kind of an experience, particularly in pedagogy, before they accept that teaching position. No?
Well, go
I
ahead.
do recall that you had said that at the last meeting. What we tried to do was draft language around which we thought we heard consensus or near consensus by several board members. There were lots of comments that were made by just one or two board members, and we didn't put that in here, but we figured in this conversation, if we heard from multiple board members that they would like to see that, then we could plan to draft it in that form.
So you're asking, are there other people who agree with that?
Yes.
So to take that one step further, though, the adjunct permit in its original form, the whole purpose was that you didn't have to have any pedagogy experience and you could just come into the classroom.
That's what I'm trying to address.
Okay, well, that was...
I think that to have absolutely no pedagogy is a mistake, but yet having a complete teacher education program of several years doesn't make sense either. And so I was looking for the compromise.
And I guess that several of us had made comment that that's what we objected to in the adjunct to begin with, and that's why we wanted to delete it, so to speak.
So delete it in order to bring it to a vote so that we can either vote it yes or no. I guess I was trying to make it a compromise so that maybe some people who were thinking they would vote no, that potentially that component would give it some credibility.
Well, we already have that in the transition to teach. So the transition to teach fulfills that very thing. You have to have pedagogy training before you can enter the classroom.
But it doesn't address some of the other issues that were mentioned before.
Okay, we'll bring it back in May. Oh, sorry, Andrea.
I just was not enamored by the experience requirement. It seemed very limiting, using myself as an example. I'm a former journalist. I teach English and history. I don't teach journalism. That seems very limiting, and I don't know what the consensus of the board would be, but it seems that defeats kind of the purpose.
That would be related. That's why we used related, I think.
And then, am I understanding the pedagogy language correctly, that the pedagogy provider could be the school itself?
Yes, absolutely. If the principal had, or a district had a candidate that they really wanted to bring in and said, I want to put the time into training this person with pedagogy, I'm going to create a program and submit it to the department. That's how this would operate.
I just have a brief comment.
Yes, Gordon.
Since you're asking for feedback from board members, just echoing my comments from the last board meeting, I feel like you made a good presentation at the last meeting, covered, quite a few of the points, and then heard our feedback, and I think moderated this with the language you've proposed. So just generally, without speaking to the specific language, I would just say that as I said at the last meeting, I'm generally supportive of this.
More comments? If not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Oh,
We had the other piece about the whether to make the temporary superintendent license portable. That's the only other
I
topic.
wasn't aware we had another piece.
There was a suggestion made, mostly by one board member, right, to make convertible to a regular superintendent's license so that it would be portable after 3 years. Didn't hear broad discussion of that. We heard a lot of targeted discussion of that. Is that something that there's consensus on?
Again, part of the idea of bringing this back is that we want to know how to draft it when we do bring final language.
Is that something we also want to just put on our little May agenda?
Question, could we also put principals in that category? Is that primary?
No,
Want to just limit it to supers?
that's all that's in the
Already,
language.
that decision was made last month
Already
by
made.
Right.
you. That's off the table.
Can I ask a question so I understand?
Yes, you may.
What would keep you from leaving School Corporation A, where you had a portable superintendent license, going to School Corporation B, and just filing for another one under that one? Can you do that right now?
With a temporary,
Yes.
if your employment contract as a superintendent ends in one district and another district wants to hire you to be a superintendent, they can then apply for a temporary superintendent
Okay.
license also, yes.
So then,
So basically, the
it doesn't
license
really
would
need to
be
be portable.
portable
But they have to be employed. It's, they
Correct.
can't go shop themselves around necessarily with their superintendent license. They have
Correct.
to have someone, a district.
So a little bit
going to
different than what
commit to
was here.
employ them.
That's what I didn't understand. Thank you.
So are you looking for feedback on this, or do you have what you need?
As to whether to proceed or not with it, I think is what they're looking for when we,
Just to proceed?
Draft language that
Yeah.
would put this.
Okay.
That looks good.
Yep.
we'll kind of put it with the other topic in May. Is that okay? All right.
Thank you.
I will now entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Those opposed? This meeting is adjourned. Let's meet at 4 o'clock right here with the little subcommittee on assessment, and we'll go forward.